tree here in just a moment if you want to be turning that direction. I'm concerned, in a very flippant way in a sense. We had the time change yesterday, and a good weekend where lots of people been outside, hence the darker areas around my forehead. I spent time out in the yard yesterday cutting a tree down with a neighbor, my tree and a good neighbor, who gets these huge logs of maple after it's all over with. And as we were meeting back again this afternoon to get everything pulled out, and we'd cut everything up into small pieces except for those giant logs from the trunk, he said, "How are you feeling?" I said, "I'm doing pretty good." Liar. But anyway, I said, "How about you?" He said, "I got up." He said, "I got home last night, I took a shower." Now mind you, he's a bit younger than me, but still, we were out there for over 5 hours doing this. He said, "I felt good this morning. I went to church." He said, "I was doing fine until I got to church. Then I started hurting." And I thought, how many people do we have hurting today because of all the activities this weekend and being cut short an hour's sleep? I was tired just sitting over there. I didn't ask him if he fell asleep. That would have been digging too personal, I guess, on him. Maybe a shorter lesson tonight. A small lesson. A lesson about small things. Exodus chapter 3. I find it interesting that when Moses first comes upon the presence of God and God making himself aware, he does it through a burning bush. Just think about that. I mean, why a burning bush? Well, it attracted Moses. He said, "Well, I've got to go check this out." I'm paraphrasing, but that's pretty much the point of it. And when he does, he gets over there, and you remember in verses 3 to 5 what goes on here. Excuse me, I'm over in Genesis. No wonder I wasn't reading right here. Let's try Exodus. Kept looking at that thinking, that's not the garden. There were some unusual things there too. But Moses said, "Now I will turn aside and I will see this great sight, and why the bush does not burn." And so when the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, "Moses, Moses." And he said, "Here I am." Then he said, "Do not draw near this place. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you stand is holy ground." Now, it was ordinary dirt before God got there. But just from the presence of God, the dirt that we normally would just wash off our hands becomes holy ground. I find that incredible. That God is able to take something so common and so ordinary and all of a sudden make it so significant and so special that you have to do something as a human being before you can even get near the ground. Now that same character is being called by God, and as he is, he's told by God, "I want you to go to Pharaoh, talk to him," in the book of Exodus. And as he's discussing this in chapter 4, there's another little insignificant thing that becomes special at this time. Moses is having a discussion, and he doesn't want to go. As you've read the story before, you realize that. So he's answering God with every excuse he can think of. Well, suppose, verse 1 says, that they will not believe me, nor listen to my voice. Just suppose that. You ever had that doubt yourself? I know I should go talk to my neighbor. Now, that's not going to talk to Pharaoh. That's way high up on the list. Just talk to your neighbor, like the guy that helps you cut the tree down. Just somebody you know real well. Good friend. And yet we sometimes will say, "But what if? What if they don't believe me? What if they don't think I know enough?" And we have so many what ifs that we excuse ourselves. Well, God doesn't accept that. And here's the thing he does. So the Lord said to him, "What is that in your hand?" And he said, "A rod." You know what the next part is, probably. He said, "Cast it on the ground." And so he cast it on the ground, and it became a serpent. And Moses fled from it. Well, you can imagine so. I mean, it was nice when it was a 10-foot rod, that whatever, however big it was, your walking staff, maybe 6 foot long. But when it's a 6-foot snake, you don't want anything to do with it. And then the Lord said to Moses, verse 4 says, "Reach out your hand and take it by the tail." That was enough for Moses. He didn't want to go for the head. God was giving him a break, I'm thinking. So he reached out his hand and he caught it. And when he did, it became a rod in his hand. Now he'll use that staff in Exodus 7 when he goes in. He will cast it down before Pharaoh. He will use it to turn the river, Nile River, into blood, chapter 7, the latter part of it. In chapter 8, the Lord will tell him to stretch out your hand with your rod over the streams and over the rivers and over the ponds, and cause frogs to come up from the land of Egypt. Another plague. Chapter 8, verse 17, "And they did so, and so Aaron stretched out his hand and his rod, and he struck the dust of the earth, and it became lice on men." Another plague down the road here. "And all the dust of the land became lice throughout all the land of Egypt." And on, this rod that is so, just a stick. Had a lot of those in my yard today, cutting them up. It was just a stick. Every one of them that's any significant size is hauled off to a lumber place, and all the twigs and all the other branches are stacked out there to be hauled off whenever our center comes by to pick up the stuff. It's just sticks. But this stick all of a sudden becomes something significant. Now I'm headed to something here. A little later on, Aaron's rod will be used in the book of Numbers. As a lot of people are starting to complain because, as we all do, they don't like what Moses is up to. So they want to follow another leader. So they start talking about all these other people. And some of these tribes are saying, "Well, why can't I be leader here?" And, you know, you and Moses, Aaron and Moses, they've done it long enough. And so some of these others are really starting to think, this is enough. Let's have a little democracy here. Enough with the dictatorship. God's not just called you. We're all good people. And so God says, okay, we're going to do something here. Let's go back to that staff. Get Aaron's staff. And I want you to take it and lay it down over here, along with different people from the different tribes and their staffs. And let's just say, maybe tomorrow morning, if one of the staffs, now these are old dried up sticks, you know, happens to put a little shoot of a leaf out on it, then we'll know that God has chosen that person. Well, all these guys are pretty much wondering. I carry this staff in my hand for the last 10 years, maybe. It's my favorite staff. It's different than normal sticks, but it's still an old dried up stick. But when we look at Numbers chapter 17, this stick becomes something more special. These rods now, as they're laid down on the road, on the pathway or whatever, Aaron's rod buds. But not only does it bud and put forth a little leaf here and there, but it puts the branch out and puts the almonds back on the leaf. And God has done something amazing, incredible with this old rod again. All to prove for these people, I've got one person I've chosen, don't buck this. As the other ones just laid there being the ordinary staff that they were at the beginning. But again, all of this done just with this simple staff. Hebrews chapter 9 will talk about the ark. Not Noah's ark, but the ark of the covenant that was carried around in the wilderness. The ark that was carried by the high priest, done the right way, with the rods passed, the staffs passed through the rods there on the ark, and carried and crossing different rivers and places, and carried into battle, and all of this, never touched, always because of what was inside the ark. One of the items inside the ark, besides the leftover manna, was Aaron's rod that had budded. They're still carrying that thing around all of this time as a reminder of what God does with simple things. In Numbers chapter 20, verse 8, God will tell again Moses, take the rod and your brother Aaron and gather before the congregation together. Speak to the rock before their eyes and it will yield water. They've been complaining about not having enough to drink. I guess we all might if we're worried about heading out into a wilderness. How are we going to get enough water to take care of 1 million people? 3-4 times the population of Chattanooga starts weighing heavy on your mind in a deserted region. Now the rod isn't exactly used, except he says, I want you to take that rod with you. It's still representing that God is with them. Big and small. Let's switch subjects here for a moment, but still along the same theme for just a minute, and then we'll make a couple conclusions, and we'll wrap up a little early tonight. 1 Samuel 17. Some of you might go, oh, yeah. And some of you are like, now where's 1 Samuel? It's in there. Old Testament. 2 characters. When I mention them, you're going to know who I'm talking about. David and Goliath. Yeah, there's a measurement of big and small. When you get down to talk about Goliath's size, he's 9 feet 6 inches tall. Just the other day, Melanie and I were walking into Fazoli's. Went out on the whatever side of town over here on Shallowford. There was a gang of people gathering around the door, and there was one guy that had his head up into the awning. And I kept looking around the legs of the people because I was trying to figure out what he was standing on. No box, no chair, no nothing. And as I was walking by, some of the people were turning around. A couple of younger kids said, how tall are you? 7'2". That's big, Steve. Bigger than you are. If he hadn't have ducked, he'd have hit his head on the awning to hang out over the top of the door. Can you imagine 9'6"? Just add another 2 foot 4 inches on top of that. Put him alongside of a young boy that's not big enough to be a soldier. And you talk about a mismatch for a loss that everybody would be betting in one direction. Consider what the armor and the spear and the sword, the javelin, all of that Goliath is carrying that David can't even pick up hardly. And he goes into battle. Now let's look at 1 Samuel 17 for just a moment. If you haven't gotten there yet, I'll give you a second. But we're talking about comparisons of big and small. Verse 40, it says, then he took his staff in his hand. That's the little boy, the smaller side of the 2 versions here. Goliath's out there waiting. And he chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook. I don't think there's anything significant. I hear stories around about, well, he had 3 bigger brothers, and all that Goliath did, and we had 1 stone for each of them. And I don't really know if that's true, but I think he just grabbed a few, like he normally carried. But not very significant 5 smooth stones, except they're going to sail straight. From the brook, put them in the pouch that he had, and his sling was in his hand. And he drew near to the Philistine. So the Philistine came and began drawing near to him. And the man who bore the shield went before him. And when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him. For he was only a youth, ruddy and good-looking. I mean, did they pick him for his looks? I mean, that's not going to help you in battle. And so the Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you come out here with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. By his gods, that is, not David's gods. And the Philistine said to David, come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the field. And David said to the Philistine, you come to me with sword and with spear and with javelin. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you defiled. Yeah, David saw the spear, javelin, and all of that. But that didn't shake him. Because his mindset was in a different direction. As he was comparing sizes here, it had nothing to do with the size of Goliath or the weight of his spear or anything else. It had to do with the God who backed him up. Verse 50, so David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him. There was no sword in the hand of David, so he borrowed Goliath, since he didn't object at that time. And with Goliath's own sword, David cuts off his head, probably barely able to lift it. The difference, as we're analyzing things here and looking at things, is a lot of times we analyze our talents and our abilities and our things by what we have. All I've got is this. And it's about like an old staff. It doesn't do much. It gets me along in life. It's certainly not enough to take me into battle, and especially against giants. But I really don't like doing battle anyway, so I'm just going to take it easy. But as I'm looking at all of these things, I think it keeps us from attempting to do big things in God's name, because all we see is what we are. And we certainly know our faults, our inabilities, our fears, our hesitance, those little things that creep inside you to say, don't speak up. You're going to get in trouble. Don't say anything right now. They're going to get angry at you. You're going to upset that person. They're going to be mad. You're going to lose your friendship over this, and on the different excuses we come up with of why we don't speak out in God's name. Why we don't do things we do. And they really don't amount to much more than Moses' excuses. They'll never believe me. They won't trust me. I don't know what I'm doing. And on as Moses had. And all he carried with him was a stick and a God that carried everything along with him. So here's some suggestions as we're looking at all this and analyzing things. As we're looking at the people that accomplished big things, and although they weren't that big, they did it because God was with them. Number one, be on duty. Be available when God calls. Now, Moses took some convincing. David just walked up there and he saw it and he said, I'm gone. Get me out there. I'm ready. But both of them didn't. So whatever it takes to put you out there on the battlefield, get it going. Just be on duty. Be available. And understand if you feel like some excuses are coming up inside of you, well, maybe you're just on the same wavelength as Moses, and that's not half bad. But go ahead and put one foot in front of the other, or one word in front of the other, and go about it. Second thing is what Paul writes, I think, in 1 Corinthians chapter 5. I don't think that's what it says there, really. And you've heard the verse before. We walk by faith, not by sight. David's sight was not about who he was or what he was capable of doing. That was more what Moses was measuring with to start with. The sight that David had was with the God that was behind him, and he couldn't see him, but he knew he was there. We have to walk by faith. This sightness that we utilize it messes our minds up. It allows us to be confused, to be halted, just to hasten, just to slow down enough that Satan can allow us to miss the moment that there's there with an opportunity God throws out for us. Keep walking. Number 3, every day is a new day with God. Doesn't matter how old you are or where you've been or what you've done or how many failures you've had. I love that passage that we sing the song about from Lamentations chapter 3. Starting at about verse 22 down to verse 25. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They're new every morning. Great is your faithfulness, God, thy faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my whole. Therefore I will hope in him. Great song, great passage. Just a reminder that every day is a new day. We're not going to bat 1,000. That's 100% for those that don't know baseball terminology. No, but if you keep getting in the batter's box and you keep swinging, you're going to hit. I don't know much about hockey. Some of you might be fans. I watch it and I see all the fighting going on. I'm not a big fan, but I like hearing Wayne Gretzky talk. The best hockey player there ever was. And the phrase that he has, I think, is the most important. When he says, you miss 100% of the shots you never take. And we don't shoot anything. We miss every one of them. Yeah, we're going to miss some. But you got to take a shot. Every day is a new day with God. Take a shot with Him. Number 4, as you compare, keep God in mind, like David did. And like Moses eventually figured out what was good to do. And the little things that we have can be great. But we've got to be willing to trust God in the process. Isn't that worth taking home? Worth living for. Worth making a difference. I'm glad you're here tonight. Take this passage, these passages, this message, and make you strong. Be what you need to be. Be the Christian you ought to be. Tonight, if your life isn't right with God, come on down front. Come have the prayers of the church. Come and be baptized if you've not made that commitment. Come back if you've gone away. You think, oh, I'm not going to step out and do that and get embarrassed by everybody else. Hey, we are all there. Been there. Some of us are still struggling with that. That's encouraging when we see that happen. Because we all know what we live for. And we all know our pains and struggles. And we stand together, and that's how we make it. If you need help, then come on down while we stand and sing. God be the glory.